Good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Welcome to the session, Preregistration for Qualitative Research. This session is part of the Research Transparency Campaign, whose goal is to increase awareness of preregistration and other open research practices that are necessary to ensure transparency in the research workflow. This campaign is organized by the Erasmus Research Institute of Management, and there is Lisette Guzman Ramirez, the Erasmus University Library, Mutelledi Nadimi, and Erasmus Research Services, myself. My name is Antonio Schettino, and I'm Coordinator Open Science at Erasmus Research Services. Among the things that I do, I develop educational and training materials on open science for students, researchers, and support staff. Also, I directly support researchers in implementing open science in their workflow. So if you want to open up your projects, send me an email and I'll do my best to help. Also, please consider joining the Open Science Community Rotterdam, where researchers and support staff help each other in learning, discussing, and adopting open science practices. For more information, you will get a link in the chat. In today's session, we'll talk about the benefits of pre-registering qualitative research. Our invited speaker is Tamarinde Haven, postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Responsible Research at the Charité Berlin. During her PhD at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, she investigated the role of the academic research climate in fostering research integrity. She was also a scholar in residence at the Center for Open Science, where she and her colleagues used a Delphi study design to understand what parts of existing preregistration templates qualitative researchers would find helpful and informative. This led to the creation of a preregistration template specifically for qualitative projects. We will hear more about it today, and we will also put the links in the chat. So Tamarinde is now traveling, so the internet connection might be a bit unstable. So to avoid any problems, she kindly recorded her talk, which will be playing in a minute. However, she is available for the Q&A session after the recording, so please feel free to ask your questions. Before starting the recording, a few reminders. Please keep your microphone muted. Video is optional, so if you don't want to be recorded, just turn it off. And if you have questions, there are two ways to ask them. After the recording, you can click on the raise hand button. We will give you the floor so that you can ask the question yourself. Or you can write down your questions in the chat, and after the recording, I will read them on your behalf. So that's it from me. Tamarinde, thanks again for joining us, and now we can start your recorded talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy International Women's Day on this March 8th, 2022. My name is Tamarinde Haven, and I want to start out by saying that what I'm presenting today is not my work only. I benefited from a very knowledgeable and helpful steering committee that you see on this slide. On the top, if we go left to right, you see Rafael Pinheiro and Fernando Rosenblatt. They wrote a very helpful paper on pre-analysis plans for qualitative research. To the right, you see Florian Ken and Christian Gladich that disseminate a very helpful preprint on pre-registration and pre-analysis plans for qualitative research. On the bottom left, you see Alan Jacobs, who wrote a chapter on pre-registration and publication bias in qualitative research. To the right, you see Leonie van Gotel, who is my co-author on a more conceptual paper looking into the potential usefulness of pre-registration from qualitative research. The man in the middle is Brian Nosek, the Executive Director of the Centre for Open Science. To the right is Tim Errington, the Director of Research at the Centre of Open Science. And all the way at the bottom right, you see Vineke Mokking, who is a Delphi expert who taught us a lot over the course of this study. Now, my interest in pre-registration and qualitative research became most evident with this paper. It was published in 2019, and here Leonie and I realized that, the arrows of pre-registration target potential research misbehavior and strengthen reproducibility in a quantitative field, but we tried to look, beyond that fact that it was initially created for quantitative research to see if the pre-registration format could also lend itself to boost the credibility of qualitative research. And we closed with some initial suggestions about what a form would look like. But these were only our suggestions. And when it seemed that the community and the Centre for Open Science showed interest, we realized that we had to take it a step further. Now, why do people talk about pre-registration? Very broadly, can be thought of as a way to strengthen the credibility and transparency of the work. And here I'm having two ways in mind. First, the openness of this information about the study encourages the researcher to carefully reflect on different study aspects and to systematically report on their design and analysis choices, including those that are made as the study progresses. And secondly, the records about the study design and analysis plan help the reviewer or the user of the study in assessing the study's quality, because the pre-registration template provides this structured insight into how the study was thought out and set up. In the current landscape, we're seeing the importance of pre-registration increasingly being recognized by various stakeholders. In here, you could perhaps think of some funders that now require the work they fund to be pre-registered, like the Arnold Foundation, but also different journals or disciplinary organizations, like the American Association for Psychologists. And this is perhaps a good moment to pause for a little bit and ask ourselves, hey, but isn't pre-registering of qualitative research something very inherently counterintuitive? It's this very iterative design. How is this going to work? And although it may seem counterintuitive, because one of the functions of pre-registration is to distinguish exploratory and confirmatory research, and qualitative research often being very exploratory by nature, the usefulness of pre-registration may extend more widely than is immediately apparent. So for one thing, pre-registration may be helpful for forms of qualitative research that involve an element of testing, because those do exist. But pre-registration can also bring greater clarity to research that operates on a more exploratory or iterative logic, because even when exploring, scholars usually bring some prior knowledge or some theoretical preconceptions to their study. And pre-registrations can then help distinguish which aspects of the study's findings drew on and which really diverged from those initial beliefs and expectations. And when we started to work on this project, there were different authors that had put forth ideas for what such a form may look like, myself being one of them. But there had been no sort of systematic empirical investigation. We hadn't really engaged with the community that this form was then supposed to serve. And the goal of our study was really to find out, okay, which parts of pre-registrations would qualitative researchers find informative and useful for their form of inquiry. And to investigate this, we used a Delphi study. And that's appropriate because, as I already indicated, there are fairly few papers on the topic at the time, and most of them were conceptual rather than empirical. And a Delphi, in a nutshell, is this structured group communication method to find a set of items that the community agrees upon. It consists of consecutive questionnaires with feedback reports in between. And just like a regular survey, you can reach out to otherwise dispersed groups. And in perhaps comparison to live consensus building methods, because people provide their feedback anonymous and in their own time, there's not that one person that can really dominate the debate. And you can see our design as indicated here in this flowchart. As you can see, we had a preparatory phase and there are 2 rounds that collectively fed into the final pre-registration form. And we put together a pool of potential panel members. That's how you normally denote Delphi participants, using a 4-fold strategy. So first, we asked steering committee members to put forth suitable colleagues, people who they know to be knowledgeable, or perhaps also critical on the topic. We then approached all the authors from relevant reporting guidelines in qualitative research, reasoning there's some similarity between a pre-registration template and reporting guidelines, and hence these people may bring very relevant views on what should be considered when designing a study. And thirdly, we reached out to what I've labeled here active qualitative researchers. And really what I mean with that is those people that over the last 5 years had published at least 4 papers using qualitative methodologies that we identify through Scopus and Web of Science. And finally, we asked, of course, participants to suggest colleagues, whether they could recommend anyone, whether they could set themselves take part or not. Perhaps they knew of people that could bring very useful views to this agreement building method. And this led to a total of 294 researchers that were invited. And then we created the first Delphi questionnaire. And again, we used a four-fold approach. First, we integrated the existing works, mostly by the steering committee members, as I indicated to you at the start of this presentation. And then we also conducted a systematic search in PubMed and PsycInfo, looking for terms like qualitative research and pre-registration, and trying to integrate all of the information we could find there. Then we screened the 21, this is very serious, existing reporting guidelines relevant to qualitative research that we could find on the Equator platform. And here, maybe some of you are familiar with Corec for interviews and focus groups. So we use those as is input as well. And then this led to a total of 36 proposals, which is arguably a lot. Now we discussed with the steering committee members, and they gave comments and suggested edits and trying to see if we could maybe put some different topics together. So this led to a total of 21 proposed items that really formed the basis of the first round. And here is an example of what our first version looked like. So you can see a term, and here it's study type. And then you can see an elaboration that starts with please describe. And you can also see the heading, namely design plan. And the heading was important for the first round because we also wanted to make a pre-registration template that was intuitive to navigate for potentially interested researchers. And participants saw this as well. And then we asked them the following questions. On a scale from 5, strongly agree, to 1, strongly disagree, we wanted to know to what extent they agreed with the suggested term. So here, that was study type. The suggested elaboration that started with please indicate. And then the relevance of the item. Is this at all something that they think we should consider in a pre-registration template for qualitative research? And finally, the heading, whether we place it under the relevant heading under the place where they would also look for it, should they use such a form? And most importantly, and this is really the distinguishing element of a Delphi, we asked participants for arguments. If they gave a very low rating, why was that? What could we do to improve? Or what had we missed or not considered so far? And because a Delphi seeks to establish agreement, it is very pivotal to define what you mean with agreement. And we set our cutoff on 68% of panel members agreeing, meaning they either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed. And in the first round, we had 35 researchers that completed the questionnaire. And out of our 21 items or proposals, 14 were considered relevant. And we merged them into 11 revised proposals because panel members sometimes suggested to combine proposals, and also 21 proposals is still quite a lot. But we also got some conflicting feedback. So 2 proposals had scores that were just below our cutoff criterion, but they had conflicting arguments. And with that, I mean that some people thought this was the most important item and others thought it should be removed altogether. So we tried our best to revise those to the best of our ability and to put them forth again. And here you can see a demo of our second iteration. You can again see the revised term, now it's study design, and the revised elaboration, which starts with please indicate. And this time we only asked panel members to rate to what extent they agreed with the revised term. And what they saw here was the initial term, a summary of their arguments, our interpretation of their arguments, and then a revised term. And we asked the same for the revised elaborations. And again, we asked them, please provide us arguments for your ratings. Please help us to improve this potential template once more. And in the second round, there were 31 researchers that completed the questionnaire. And out of our 11 items, 9 of them for the proposed terms, people were already in agreement. So here we didn't do very substantial revisions, we only did small revisions. And for the elaborations, 10 out of 11 already reached our agreement criterion, so these were slightly revised. And the other two terms were quite substantially revised in accordance with panelist arguments, as well as one elaboration. And the optional terms, you may remember from the last round, they actually got very high relevance scores this time, and they were added to the form. So I thought it would be useful if I show you briefly what this looks like. So this is an illustration of our Delphi feedback process. And in the lower row, if you will, you can see the term that we put forth in the initial round here at sampling strategy. And above, you can see the various sorts of feedback that we got. And I now make bold the sort of sections we found most important. So in the first round, we learned that people were a little bit hesitant about the term sampling within the qualitative context. And they were concerned that it would maybe be too statistical, if you will. And some suggested that maybe something we were talking about instead was a case selection strategy. And so in the next round, we tried with case selection strategy. And then we learned, no, these are actually two different things. One is your sampling, and then within your sample, you can select your cases. So we try to accommodate that feedback, and in the final form, the item now reads sampling and case selection strategy. So to wrap up, we developed an agreement-based form for pre-registering qualitative research. And I want to pause here for a minute and say, it is pivotal to assure that the strength of qualitative research, which is precisely its flexibility to adapt, adjust, respond, is not lost in pre-registration. And analogous to quantitative pre-registration, it need not be, because ultimately pre-registration is a plan and it's not a prison. I would also like to emphasize that the use of this form is voluntary. The pre-registration should provide a systematic starting point, but it also really needs to be updated as the study evolves. And this is especially true within qualitative research that often follows a more iterative approach. We realize also that qualitative research is an immensely diverse area, and the form that we develop may not be optimally suited for every study. So we would encourage scholars to propose additional modules. I've labeled them here. And these would be items that could be added, but would be relevant for a specific type of inquiry. So here may be approaches like process tracing in political science, where people may be able to define much more precise evidence criteria before commencing data collection may be useful. I would also like to disclose that the proposed pre-registration form overlaps substantially with parts of reporting guidelines for qualitative research. So similar to JAS, we ask the users to provide an overview of the research design and a rationale for applying a particular design. And I'm inclined to believe that this and other overlap can be useful, as ideally study pre-registration facilitates reporting of the final findings in accordance with the relevant reporting guidelines, because these similar topics have been considered. And finally, it's important to emphasize that there is at this point no empirical evidence that a pre-registered study would lead to a higher study quality, however we may define this. And I also think in this case, it can be very fruitful to look at examples of qualitative pre-registrations in case you're interested. So here there are already some examples out there. I looked at this website on March 7th, and you could see that there are already 308 registrations with the form I've just talked you through. So in case you're interested, I would highly recommend you to look at that resource. And let me end with some next steps. The form is now integrated into the Open Science Framework workflow, meaning that when a user wants to pre-register a study, the version I just presented to you is listed on the menu. And the other step, of course, is building a community of qualitative pre-registration enthusiasts. People who want to promote the practice, who want to educate others, and who would ultimately also be willing to look at its effects. I would like to close first and foremost by thanking and deeply acknowledging all of our panel members who voluntarily and without compensation gave me an hour or sometimes 1.5 hours of their time. This would not have been possible without them. And I also want to thank the Centre for Open Science for hosting me during this project and for integrating a form into the Open Science framework. If you have any questions, a more detailed version of what I just talked you through, can be found in the International Journal of Qualitative Methods, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, that was great. So thank you. It was very, very clear. Thanks for this recording. So I cannot see any hands in the chat, but a couple of people were, so during the registration procedure, they already sent a couple of questions. I think you already briefly touched upon these two questions, but maybe you want to, you have something else you want to talk about, or you want to qualify. So we'll start with the first question, if that's okay with you. So the first question is by Tessa Oman. What are the implications of pre-registration for qualitative research that is iterative or adjust based on initial results?
Thanks, Antonio, and thanks, Tessa. I hope you can hear me clearly. I think there are two ways in which I could answer this question. So I've already hinted in the presentation about the point that a qualitative pre-registration especially should be updated by virtue of its design, where you are actually encouraged to adjust things along the way based on the sort of data you gather and the extent to which you have already looked and investigated that data. What I'm expecting here maybe is not so much that you just have a pre-registration and then your final paper, and maybe in your final paper a section that goes into deviations from protocol or deviations from the pre-registration. Ideally, you would see more of those sort of updates along the way, so that I, as a reviewer or user, or maybe as a colleague of yours, I would ultimately get a little bit of insight in the evolution of your thinking associated with this study, if you will. And the other way I could go about this is maybe also that, especially people that are new to qualitative research, they tend to look at it a little bit like a black box. You go out there, you go to the field, you go talk with these people, I'm simplifying now, of course, and then you come up with all these beautiful things. How? And the other implication I'm seeing here is that maybe by trying out these sort of approaches, and of course empirically examining them, maybe we get a little bit of an insight into the researcher's head, because we've seen some of their presuppositions a little bit more clearly, and that can inform us in critically appraising and reflecting on their findings. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's more than highlighting the importance of registration in increasing transparency rather than constraining thoughts processes, like simply a window into somebody's brain or somebody's thought process, which I think is something that is very valuable also for quantitative research. So thank you for that. There is another question.
Can I note something briefly on that, Antonio? Because I think especially something that qualitative researchers do, and is very much inherent in the practice, especially if you look at fields like ethnography, is being very open about what were their own motivations that brought them to this topic. And I've always found that profoundly valuable. So yes, if you say that, I actually think that some quantitative researchers may even be able to learn from that when we're talking about issues like transparency. So just adding that to promote all the qualitative researchers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yes, so there was also another question. This is a bit more general, and it will be nice to see how you decide to go about this. How may we improve? Oh, so this is a question by Dan Peters. How may we improve the transparency of qualitative research without detracting from the core aims that it tries to achieve?
So I think there are various ways possible, but let me start with a really radical one. Or at least something that some people consider radical. I think, first of all, that there are various qualitative study types or study designs where the data may actually be openly shareable, provided the participants gave the adequate consent for this. And this is something that we're seeing scholars exploring right now, and they're also trying to work on making these data protection templates as, understandable and readable for people. But this is actually an area where traditionally seen people have really thought that always has to be closed and you can never share any of that. And I think if we're talking about transparency, provided we gave our participants the choice at the beginning, whether they wanted to see their data disclosed in that particular way, I think we can open many beautiful doors and perhaps also start reusing each other's qualitative data. And I really look forward to seeing what that brings.
Yeah, that's great. So something that I also remember is I read, now I can't remember where, but some participants expect in some way even that their data are shared with others, or in order for more people to be able to use the data. So they spend time, they spend effort in participating in your research, and sometimes they are really like, but I want to help more people. So I think, as you say, like maybe having a bit more of a conversation beforehand to say, hey, this is, like it would be nice if this is shared with more people. What are your thoughts? Are you okay with this? So I have one last question, which is a question that we ask all our speakers. If you had to choose one open science practice that is necessary to ensure transparency in your field, what would it be?
I could give a lot of different answers, but maybe let me not give the typical pre-registration one, because I think it's already apparent that I would defend that practice. Let me say that something I still think is very much worth exploring is green open access. I realise that in the current incentive system of science, there are many people that feel they have to publish in particular journals, and those journals may have no sort of gold OA policies. Please be aware that you can always look into whether green open access, so depositing a version of your manuscript that's not the sort of journal edited form on a relevant repository, is always possible. And I think especially in the current day and age, that's still very important and vital to open up research. So I'll go with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too, right? So you can publish wherever you think your community will be most receptive, but simultaneously you can have a copy openly available to everybody. And this is something that we will also discuss in a future session related to open access publishing. So I think we are pretty much on time, and I don't see hands raised.
There is one question in the chat.
Oh, yes. I'm going to read it for you then. In some instances, qualitative studies are not given equal attention with quantitative studies, especially among practitioners or policymakers. What would be potential reasons and experiences and references to verify such perceptions?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. I hope you can still hear me. I was instructed that I need to put it back on. So I think it has to do with the sort of different hierarchies of evidence that many of us tend to think about. And especially if you talk about practitioners and policymakers, I presume you're thinking a little bit in the biomedical field. And they're very much, the qualitative research is often equated with the sort of expert opinion, and with the whole rise of evidence-based medicine, that expert opinion and also qualitative research became something that we considered a lower level of evidence. So I can sort of see some historical and political reasons there. I also think there are different sort of divides of fields underlying some of this. But I think it's also very important that in the recent day and age, we're seeing more and more appreciation of qualitative research, especially when it comes to particular questions that a quantitative study simply cannot answer. And these are many things about why do people do something? Why do they maybe forget their medication, even though that medication is going to change their lives? There are many phenomenal questions in this world where I think qualitative research can be so informative, and I'm actually very happy that we're seeing it more and more recognized, also on a funder and journal-based level, although there is still a way to go. I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep it here, but thank you.
Yeah, no, but I think it's I think maybe, like a good strategy would be to show how these two approaches can complement each other rather than be, like in opposition. But yes, we are on time. Our session is over. I would like to thank you, Tamarinde, so much for joining us. Thanks for the recording. Thanks for being with us for the Q&A. So many thanks to all of you for joining us, and for all the events of the Research Transparency Campaign. You can click on the link that will be put in the chat. Thanks for your participation. Enjoy your day, and see you in future sessions.